post-COVID, how often, whether you're from a host or from a guest perspective, do you get 30 minutes, an hour of undivided attention to talk to someone about something you're passionate about? Think about that for a minute. How often? Because if you go and get coffee with someone now, how often is that person's phone buzzing and they're quickly checking their phone or their watch? You don't get the same undivided attention that you potentially got pre-COVID when things weren't as accessible and the norms. Podcasting is becoming that space where you get to use your voice, you get to make that impact, you get to build authority, all these different things, but you also really get to connect with someone.
Join me, Jeremy Swick, on Into the Unknown, a podcast that delves into the personal journeys, stories, and experiences of individuals across diverse professions. As a historian by trade, I firmly believe that our personal histories shape our present and offer valuable insights into our paths ahead. With that being said, let's get into it. On this episode of Into the Unknown, I have a really special returning guest, Olivia Atkin. How are you doing today, Olivia?
I'm doing great, and I'm so excited to be talking with you today and grateful that we get to have this amazing conversation.
It really is exciting. As I mentioned, you were a guest previously on the show, and it's funny because I laugh about how much we actually talk. It's quite often, to be honest, between different ideas or guests or things we have going on.
Yes, and I love it. I love that we get to talk, we get to collaborate, and that's really a great example of how powerful the podcasting community can be. Is it's not just, and I say this all the time, whether you're a guest or host or you're collaborating on things, the podcasters in the community really do want to help each other and help elevate each other. And whether you're a guest just a one time or someone who's trying to collaborate, build a relationship with the host. You know, the first time we had met and I was a guest, we were just connecting right then and there. Like, we connected a little bit before that and talked, and you were like, come be a guest on my podcast. And since then it grew into having a friendship, you know, being able to refer you guests, being able to get feedback from you, being able to talk about different topics, getting to work together in different spaces. So it just shows like how things can build and a relationship can build off of one connection.
Olivia, I couldn't agree more. It's one of those things you mentioned, the networking. And I always encourage my guests and people interested into reaching out to their hosts and keeping that line of communication, because you really never know when we could collaborate or we could provide value for each other, whether it's a guest on my show or a guest on your show or just ideas we have. Because I think a lot of the times people don't realize other podcasts, at least in my perspective, other podcasters want to see other shows succeed as well. It's not like we're not competing against each other. It's more like we're working together to both see success.
I couldn't agree more. And it's one of those things that is so interesting with the podcast space, because I have found podcasting is a niche, right? Everyone has a show, they're trying to make an impact with their voice, but you've so many things people want to talk about. You've broader shows like mine and yours, where we have different guests on regularly, different topics, different pain points we discuss, different growth margins. Then you have shows that are super niche down. I work with a podcast that is all for just for first responders, and everything they talk about is around the first responder community. I work with a podcast in military. I work with a podcast in you know, a family oriented sports podcast. There's so many different areas. And so when podcasters come together, it's like, yes, we all have a podcast, but what the numbers also show in data in the podcasting industry is that people tend to listen to 3 or 4, sometimes more, podcasts weekly. So it's what there's no reason to compete, because again, some are broader, some are nicher, some, you know, people want to listen to different things. And so it's like, let's actually connect and be able to support each other and run those ideas and do different things.
I couldn't agree more. And as you mentioned, we both work with a wide variety of different podcasts. I work with the sandwich generation, those who are taking care of their elder parents and young children all at the same time. And of course, I probably wouldn't listen to that show specifically because I'm not in that stage of life. But what I found is there's such a wide variety. There's people who listen to my show and that show because sometimes maybe they need a break from the realities of dealing with their children, young children, and aging parents. So, as you mentioned, it's just so great that there's such a variety of podcasts out there.
And it's one of those things too, is like, why can't you listen to multiple different ones? And what I found too is, even in the essence of uh, guest swapping, for example, where I might have a guest on my podcast. I actually just recorded with someone who, when I was doing research on them, their name sounded familiar. And I was like, wait, this person just reached out to me. They said we had mutual connections. And I'm researching and I saw they were a guest on yours. And I was like, oh, wait, yeah, I helped with that. Okay, got it. Here's the connect, right? And I listened to that episode, and then we ended up recording mine. And I was like, it's great because they're showing up in two different places. But what the conversation ended up being was two completely different conversations. And so, yeah, it's the same. Sometimes it's the same individuals, but the conversation can be so diverse and different each time, depending on where they are that day mentally, how they show up, what questions get asked. And that's one of the powerful things as well.
And it's something I appreciate about your show is that active listening. Obviously, as you mentioned, people don't always, they kind of have their idea, maybe their story they want to share, but they sometimes just, I always tell people, just let your guests talk because they will give you all the information. They will open those doors if they want to talk about it, or those windows and let you peek inside. Maybe they're not ready to talk about it yet, but so much of that goes into the active listening portion of just being a host.
Oh, 100%. And it also goes into one of the things when I do podcast consulting with individuals, specifically hosts. There's two sides of it. For individuals who are thinking about being guests, one of the biggest turnoffs when I'm working to get them on podcasts or as a host, I get reach out, is if you tell me exactly what you're going to talk about. Here's my talking topics. This is what I'm going to talk about. It rubs me such a wrong way because as a host, I have an audience who listens, who likes my show. Do not try to tell me what I should have on my show and what we should be talking about as a guest on my show. It will come out. But to me, it's like whenever I see that email or people ask me, like, oh, should we tell, like, in the email, talk about what we'll talk about? Like, here's this topic, or we could lean into that. I'm like, no, let the authentic conversation happen in that initial, whether it's a form they have, or I always do what I call vetting call with every guest I have on. And then the flip side from the host is it is your responsibility to also prep for the conversation. So for me, what I do is I have that vetting call I just mentioned, which is 30 minutes. Then I do about, and again, over time and having over 175 episodes recorded, I have gotten very good at how long it takes me to prep. It used to be, it took me an hour, hour and a half to prep. Now it takes me about 15 to 30 minutes. But have what you're going, how you're going to introduce the guest, um, with, like, how you're going to say that written out. So mentally, you're clear minded with that. And then have about I do 5 to 8 questions of what I might potentially ask. That helps me set up the recording for success because it might be a month or two, maybe 4 months before we record, depending on time of year and what's going on with the guest schedules and my schedule. So that keeps me focused of like, oh, when we talked, this was really interesting, or this is something I want to bring up. But it also shows the guest that, hey, listen, I heard you. Here's some interesting points I'm thinking about talking about. It gives them a framework to kind of work with. But then what I go on to explain to them is this is literally a prep. This is example questions. Um, And I've had, out of all the recordings I've done, only 3 guests not be able to go off that sheet. Like, they so prepped those set of questions. I very quickly learned when I tried to ask follow-up questions that we couldn't. Like, it was like deer in headlights. But everyone else, I give those questions and we go far left or far right, and it's amazing. But at least, like, I have some insight into where to lean, what to ask for as a follow-up, and I think that helps things go really smoothly as well, and really provide value, because you're in the headspace of, like, reading that right before you record and go, oh, that was really interesting, I want to lean into that. But also being able to pivot and, like you said, really lean in and listen to what the guest is saying, because there's been a lot of times, and I call them like kind of hot mic moments, as some people in like television like to use it, reality TV. Oh, that was a hot mic moment. Um, but if you listen to my episodes, more times than not, whether it's a celebrity, I've had celebrities say, or entrepreneurs, where they will get very vulnerable and tell a story and be like, I've never shared this before, or no one's asked me this before. And it just shows the power that prep has, but also having an authentic conversation and being present in it.
It's one of those mention you keep mentioning the authentic conversation. I think it's so true, and I'll use him as an example because I know he's all right with it. Amon Green, we're talking about, and with my show, we talk about a fork in the road or a time. You made a decision, went for it, and all that. He ends up talking about his contract where he's supposed to re-sign with the Packers, goes for a trip to visit Denver, and then learns much later that the Packers actually were responding to his offer, but his agent at the time wanted him to sign with Houston because it was a better contract, a better deal for him, less so for Amon. Ends up signing it. Thankfully, I guess not thankfully, but he doesn't learn about it until years and years later. And it was one of those moments where you could tell it was a really vulnerable conversation. And of course, at the end of the recording, I always, hey, with him especially, I was like, do you want to share that? And he's like, oh no, I'm ready to talk about it. Full send that. And it's just funny you mentioned those authentic conversations and how they come up. I think it's a testament to how you prep and how you're prepared for the conversation.
And I think, as I talk to podcast hosts who are trying to build their show out and really make it impactful and last the long term, and not the in the pod fade, the 3 episodes or the 6 episodes, the 8 or the 10, right? And 90% don't make it past episode 20. They want to hit those milestones. They see their vision. They want to use their voice to make an impact. It's really important to understand your strategy and create systems early that will take you long term, right? As I brought up with I knew they were going to be vetting calls. When I started my vetting calls, they were hour blocks. Now they're 30, because I know what to ask now. I've done it enough time, right? So my schedule has pivoted in what I need and how many I can do in one day while getting other tasks done. Same with podcast prep, right? It took me the first probably 40, 50 episodes to get to a place where I could sit down and not feel daunted. Oh, I got 6 podcasts to prep. I'm like, this is going to take forever. And be like, okay, I got 6. I can do this in 2.5 hours. Easy. And sometimes it's less than that, depending on how much information I got, all of those different things. But, it's also like understanding the workflow, right? It's, okay, when to expect an episode to be edited and in the pipeline or in the RSS feed. When should I get this title and description out and everything scheduled? What is my timeline for doing this? Some hosts have a turnaround time of, they'll put, when I work with them on titles, descriptions, and uploads, it'll be and I don't need approval for things. It could be a 24-hour turnaround. And it's like, okay, I know Sunday night this is going to be in my inbox. Their episode releases Monday night. Monday morning this is getting done. And like, they know what to expect. And if I don't see it in my inbox when I wake up Monday morning, I know I got to ping them to email them and be like, hey, where is this? And they appreciate that because sometimes life happens, they forget to send it, something gets delayed, and you can communicate. There's individuals like Jeremy where you have it in the system months out, months burst, sometimes longer. And so you could do a whole month. Like there's times I work on clients and I'm like, okay, we're ready to go for the month, which I do recommend having batch recordings where you are recorded for 4 to 8 weeks out so that if life happens, different things going on, you don't have to stress about, oh my God, I have nothing to release. And then I could sit down in one day and go, okay, this day I'm doing their whole month. And then they know it's done. We don't have to touch it. Everything's set. Um, and it's different, understanding different people's workflows, but having that system put in place. And then over time, it is a system that is just being moved and processes that are getting touched and implemented rather than flying by the seat of your pants every single day.
Olivia, I couldn't agree more. I think it's so important to have those systems. And as you mentioned, both us being in the same kind of sphere with working with clients, it's also knowing your clients as well. I have a client where basically I have to drop her intro and her conclusion, and it's going to be gold, maybe some editing for the audio, and she knows that. So I maybe am more lenient with when she gets her episodes in. Whereas others, I know there's just going to be more work. It's not saying they're not a great podcaster. It's simply where they are in their podcasting journey. It takes a little bit more prep and more work to do it. So I think having those conversations with clients or as a podcast host with your editor kind of upfront are really important. I know when I launch podcasts with my clients, we record 6 batch episodes right away. I don't like to go too much further with those early episodes because you're still learning, you're still figuring it out, but at least it forces you to get 6 done. We're done with
Yeah.
6, and through there I make them listen to it. That's one thing. It's always grueling with the new clients because I make them sit there and we're listening it together, and I'm going to listen for your ums and your uhs and your filler words and all that great stuff. But I think it's such part of the learning process in actually becoming a successful podcaster, however you look at success. But having someone who is there to support you is really important.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. When I work with podcasters or people who are not podcasters and they're trying to get on podcasts or figuring out if it's the right avenue to go down, if it is aligned with them. One of the very first questions, I should say, in our introduction call and seeing if it is a right fit to work together from any aspect is what is your goals? Why do you want to get on podcasts? Is it to make an impact with your voice? Is it for lead generation? Is it for branding? Is it for authority? Is it networking with hosts? Like, where are your goals? Where are you today? And you can hit multiple buckets. Like I tell people, it's completely fine to say, I want all of those things. It is okay to be like, all I really care about is making an impact. And so I just want to get on podcasts where I could tell the story, tell what I'm doing, shed light on it, but it's understanding very early on what are your goals, what are the metrics we're measuring this by, and then that starts to set your roadmap. And sometimes, like I was talking to a host earlier today who signed up to work with me, and the very first thing is we're doing a podcast audit. And I'm diving into figuring out what he's doing well so far and what he needs support on and what needs to be improved and timeline of the priorities in that as well. And really diving into where he needs to spend time or his team needs to spend time. But it's one of those things that the reason we're starting there is he has a podcast. He's 50 episodes in, now probably more by the time this releases. And he said to me, Olivia, like everything you're saying is in alignment. And when I started, I understood it's not meant to be perfect. I need to get it out there. Now we've gotten to that point where he is batch recording. He is doing all these things. I want to elevate it. Okay. Well, how do we elevate it? We need to look at what is doing well. A lot of times it isn't necessarily content or conversation if you're having the right conversations, right? And the right guests and that kind of thing. It comes down to all the nuances. the titles, the descriptions, the consistency, the SEOing in the background, it, making sure, do you have a producer and editor like Jeremy? How are you showing up in this space? What are you doing? And those conversations are really important. If someone comes to me and we talk about getting on the right, podcasts, and they're like, oh, I've been on all these podcasts, my next question is, okay, and what has those results been for you? Like, how have you found them? And sometimes I get, oh, like I haven't found any results from it, I didn't really see value. And I'm like, why? I think it's always important, no matter what you do, is ask the question why. A lot of times is, oh, I was just getting on podcasts. Okay, well, if you're not getting on the right podcast to have the right conversation, obviously it's not going to move the needle. I'll share an example of myself. When early on, when I was like I'd started my podcast, people were reaching out to be guests on their podcast. And I say typically because sometimes now I do say no. But when I was starting, I was like, sure, I'll support you. I got you. And I have such a vast background that I was like, I'll talk about anything you want, wherever you want to be. And I had gotten a connection from a podcast host friend of mine who was like, hey, I was on this person's podcast. You want to be on? Like, I think you would add value to their audience. Like, I'll do this connection. It's like, okay. And I get on the podcast and I'm ready to talk about like my journey and podcasting and how awesome podcasting could be, and like my consulting, like all these things around my journey in podcasting, because the value I have, yes, I have a very vast background, but where I am today and how I can help so many people is by using their voice to make an impact through podcasting, no matter what that might look like. And we were talking, and it ended up like, I did not realize, because of how her podcast description was written. And again, I knew the person who had been on that podcast. So, like, in my head, it wasn't like I needed to do a ton of research. It's an alignment. Yes. And it was a podcast about weddings and like wedding venues and all this stuff. I'm not married. I got nothing to do with wedding. Yeah, I used to work with a DJ company and like do consulting, and like one of my best friends, like I helped him grow his business in like as a DJ and photographer, and now he does massive weddings. But like besides that, I know space like business talking in this space, especially for an hour. I could talk about success and growth, and that's what we ended up talking about. But anyone who listens to that episode, you wouldn't necessarily have any idea what I was truly doing in that space. I left the episode going, why in the world was I on this podcast? Now, for me, I look at times when that hits as, okay, that was market research, right? I got to help another podcaster out, but now I know exactly from the types of questions they're asking what they really want to talk about, which means if I'm going to tell someone to be a guest on this podcast, I need to know it fits in, and that's the type of conversation they need to have, or like can have on both sides. I'm not going to just throw anyone at them. So for me, like, I'm open to it because I'm like, I could see how the host presents, what they're really looking for, the kind of conversations they have, and be able to refer guests accordingly. But on the other note, the same conversation has to happen as a host. When Jeremy, when you and I first connected, not only was I a guest, but then I talked to you afterwards of like, hey, what kind of guests are you looking for? What kind of conversation do you hope? And then like I leverage that in the back of my mind every single time I get a client who wants to be on the podcast or asking for an introduction to someone in the podcasting space. I'm like, okay, this could be a good match to have a good conversation, the kind of conversation that adds value to the both of you. Well, also, if your goal is to network, Jeremy's a great networker. If your goal is to learn more about the editing and like the different sides of podcasting, he's someone you definitely should talk to. So like those are all playing in the back of my mind. And that's why I know I'm going on a little tangent here, but it frustrates me that there are companies out there, marketing firms that are like, oh, we'll just get you on podcasts, or there's no clear results. If you come from a place and everything I do is custom. So no two guests get on the same set of podcasts ever. With over the 200 people I've worked on, just getting them on podcasts, none of them have had the same 4 podcasts. But it's knowing the host, knowing what the goals are, having that transparency, and being like, what is the value we want to come out of this conversation? Because that can make or break a guest appearance, a host show, how people think about it, so many different facets.
Olivia, I couldn't agree more. I think it's so much about, obviously, as you mentioned, creating value for both the host but also the guests so they have an enjoyable time on the show. But also, as a host, I'm not like, hey, Olivia, why did you send me this person? This person has nothing. I mean, luckily with my show, it's your origin story. So most people have their own story. But it's one of those things where I think it goes to it's a testament to what you're able to provide, but also, again, having those positive guest and host relationship experiences. And again, with the networking, you really never know who you might be able to be connected with then.
Oh yeah, I get all the time emails from clients, whether like, especially from the guest side, and a lot of times from the host side as well. It's like, that was such a grateful, like impactful conversation I had with this guest you sent me. It was amazing. We're actually connecting on this. Or a guest will be like, I didn't know like it could be that rewarding, especially if they've never done podcasts before. But it's, or hey, they actually refer me to this person and I signed a client. Like, I wasn't necessarily expecting that to happen that fast. And so it's really, what you put it in it is what you'll get out of it, right? As an entrepreneur, what you put into your business in the beginning, from the aspect of training yourself, time management, how you show up in different spaces, will then affect your outcomes. All these different aspects. It's same with podcasting. And I think one of the things is, a lot of people look at podcasting as a hobby. Well, if you show up to anything like it's a hobby and not a business, your results will be different. But if you show up and put it in the mindset of like, this could be a net, like, I joke, podcasting is now a rich man's coffee date. Post COVID, how often, whether you're from a host or from a guest perspective, do you get 30 minutes, an hour of undivided attention to talk to someone about something you're passionate about? Think about that for a minute. How often? Because if you go and get coffee with someone now, how often is that person's phone buzzing and they're quickly checking their phone or their watch? You don't get the same undivided attention that you potentially got pre-COVID, when things weren't as accessible in the norms. Podcasting is becoming that space where you get to use your voice, you get to make that impact, you get to build authority, all these different things, but you also really get to connect with someone.
And, it's such a powerful connection as well because if you get them to say yes, I tell my clients a lot of times, especially in the business space, you could talk to some of your dream CEOs. You'd be shocked at who might say yes because, again, that collaborative spirit, it helps them because I'm sure their marketing people are telling them they need more content. But when you're a CEO of, a Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 company, you're not trying to go out there and make TikToks. That being said, you might be more comfortable, more willing to sit down either in person or via video to talk, to have that coffee conversation, if you will. It creates that content for you as the business owner or whoever you may be, but it also obviously helps getting that message and that story across.
Yes, 120,000%.
That was another fun episode of Into the Unknown. I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen. And if it provides you any value or entertainment, I would love if you shared it with others, liked, subscribed, and really just help the podcast grow. Again, tell a friend, tell a foe, just anyone who might enjoy hearing some stories of people's own journeys and what got them to where they are today. Till next time.